Okay, good morning to all of you. Thank you for joining us this morning for this last open session, the last panel. And I hope then you can have some rest after 3 intensive days of CIVIS meetings. As co-chair of Hub2, Society, Culture, Heritage, I would like to welcome you also on behalf of Hub2, which Athens and Tübingen have been running together since autumn 2020, with Athens currently heading the hub. And I would like to cordially thank the Hub Council members for their valuable assistance in the organization of the panels. Some of the Hub Council members are here with us today, both as speakers and in the audience. So thank you very much again. Without you, these panels would not have been made possible. As the Rector and Vice Rector of the University of Athens underlined yesterday, hubs are in the heart of the CIVIS project, as they organize and monitor the educational offer of our universities to our dozens of thousands of students across Europe. So far, 2 panels characterized by interdisciplinary approach were hugely successful in our opinion, and hopefully this will continue. We're certain this will continue today with our 3rd panel. And all these 3 panels represent a huge variety of approaches and of fields in the CIVIS universities. We have heard and will hear views representing philosophy, gender studies, political science, media studies, linguistics, ethnography, literature, history, art history, museum studies, and critical heritage studies. Just to mention this list underlines the really huge possibilities of future cooperation among our various universities. So I'm welcoming our 5 speakers today, representing 5 universities. And we have made an effort to have all universities represented on the panels to the extent that this was possible. So I'm welcoming our first speaker from the Universidad Autónoma de Madrid, Professor Juan Luis González, from the Art History and Theory of Art. I hope I've said it right. Please. He will be talking on preserving, studying, exhibiting artistic heritage at his university.
Should I move with using the cursors? Right. Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed for this presentation and for being here, especially since yesterday dinner, which was absolutely fabulous. I'm very grateful for that. Well, I'm going to read my presentation in order not to be too late. Well, despite the forced distance to physical artworks that COVID-19 has brought to us, during these last 2 years, some new ways of promoting direct contact with artistic heritage and face-to-face relations have been adopted at the UAM. In addition to providing theoretical tools to navigate the current iconosphere, teaching art history also requires teaching the eyes of our students to see a work of art. That is, to know it by its dimensions, materiality, and conservation, together with its exhibition conditions in the museums where they are preserved. In this presentation, I will show you just 3 examples of how we have integrated museum networks since 2020 within our bachelor's, master's, and doctoral degrees in art, literature, and cultural studies. The UAM campus as an art laboratory, conservation, study, and dissemination was a teaching innovation project which ran from 2020 to 2021. Throughout its development, our students were able to experience models of active learning about and from the work of art. Built ex novo in 1968, the UAM was decorated by some of the most avant-garde artists of the moment. Its architectural setting is unique. Corridors and patios allow fluid wandering between modules, a metaphor for transdisciplinary knowledge. Since its inception, it has not ceased to enrich itself, holding today a significant set of collections, some musealized, the recovery of which has been promoted very actively in recent years. The project was organized through actions and autonomous learning in 4 subjects involving about 200 students, taught by professors from the Department of History and Theory of Art. These subjects were conservation and cultural property, history and theory of the museum, art since 1945, and art and globalization. The teaching materials and tools that derived from the project were videos, exercises, an exhibition, a photography contest, and a tour. Although, due to the pandemic, not all actions could be implemented, our project definitely contributed to a greater and better knowledge and visibility of the UAM heritage. In 2021, the Department of History and Theory of Art launched a new master's degree in art history, classical tradition and globalization in the early modern world. This one-year MA program is hosted by the Royal Academy of Fine Arts in Madrid, which means that classes take place both at the university campus and at this prestigious institution. Founded in the 18th century, the Royal Academy has opened its museum, print and drawings collection, library and archive for our students, and many classes take place in direct contact with objects and research materials. This MA program combines object-based learning with a strong historical and theoretical grounding in the early modern period. As is well known, Madrid is an extraordinary place to study the art of this time, both from Spain and other parts of Europe, and as well as from America and Asia, as the many museums within the door's distance of the Royal Academy serve as an extended classroom. The MA is aimed at students who wish to gain greater specialized knowledge of the period spanning from the 15th to the early 19th centuries, from broad cultural perspectives, which include a deeper understanding of the classical tradition, but also issues about identity formation, agency, global circulation, and markets, and matters of class, gender, and race. The practical focus of several of its subjects is geared to foment the know-how necessary to work with objects in a variety of professional fields, including museums, galleries, auction houses, digital humanities, and high-level tourism, in addition to preparing students who wish to pursue a PhD in art history. Finally, from April to May 2022, I have coordinated a Civis graduate network on Baroque and New Baroque, hosted between the UAM and the Prado Museum. It featured a multidisciplinary research-oriented program addressed to PhD and master students from fields such as literary studies, art history, musicology, performance studies, theater, dance, and film studies, history, or social sciences. It dealt with the historic period of the 16th to 17th centuries and beyond, enriching it with later waves of reinterpretation of the Baroque, the so-called New Baroque. The network's first spring school was prepared by a series of online lectures and discussions. These activities have reflected the increased interest in Baroque and New Baroque from an intermediate perspective. At the end, 10 professors from various disciplines and 6 Civis universities gave insight into the recent research and an overview of seminal theories, whereas 26 students presented their projects and discussed them with us. The participants learned about the relations of Baroque and New Baroque forms and featured from examples from different disciplines. This has enhanced our analytical skills while putting our own research projects in a wider context. Apart from collaborating in an international and transdisciplinary manner, we also had the opportunity to discuss masterpieces of Baroque art at the Prado Museum with curators. Through initiatives such as those here presented, our goal is to raise awareness of the importance of the conservation, dissemination, and enjoyment of a heritage of great value and interest. Making it visible and making it accessible are two of the commitments and obligations of our university with the society. With our work, we want to contribute to the comprehensive education of students and promote intellectual reflection and the critical spirit of the local and regional communities and beyond via CIVIS and its inter-university campus. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Juan Luis, for this very precise and informative presentation, taking into account the various actions that go on at Madrid. I can't see the sharing. I'm sharing a presentation. I can't see it. Yeah, okay. Well, I'm showing this to you because we've got a slight change in speakers. Because we've got a new speaker, Professor Juliette Dimas, who will be speaking a bit later. So there's a bit change on the program. But for the time being, I'm calling to the floor Professor Matthias Frihammer from Stockholm University, who will be talking on making a military heritage centered in nation in Sweden's Cold War history.
Thank you. Thank you, and thank you very much for letting me be part of this interesting session. 10 minutes or 15 minutes is a very short period of time, so I start direct. My name is Matthias Frihammer. I'm an ethnologist at Stockholm University, and I will present a heritage project that I've been involved in the last 3 years, and that ended by 2021. It's called Making a Military Heritage, Gender and Nation in Sweden's Cold War History. And it's a multidisciplinary project including ethnology, gender studies, art and architecture history, and political science. And Cecilia Åse, that you see on the board, is the project leader. And I will make a very brief presentation of the project that will end with a reflection on what happens when the context of a research field changes dramatically, as has done in this case. The project combines two theoretical perspectives: critical heritage studies and feminist international relations. Critical heritage studies offers a framework to understand uses of the past as resources in the present for constructing collective identities or imagined communities or something else. And feminist international relations highlights gender issues or aspects of protection, citizenship, and in this case, the military. The general premise was that both the field of heritage and the field of international relations accentuate national communities as well as national self-images. And the aim was to explore how Sweden's Cold War history is given societal meaning when military areas, artifacts, and activities are turned into a national heritage. How is national identity and gender negotiated when experiences of geopolitical threats are framed as heritage? How does gendered military heritization affect understandings of security? And we started from the somewhat paradoxical Swedish security policy context during the Cold War in this project, where on the one hand, Sweden nurtured a self-image as a non-aligned, neutral nation, constantly pursuing peace through non-violence. And here I let the monument Non-Violence, which stands outside the United Nations headquarters in New York, and is by a Swedish artist, symbolize what you can call the old Swedish song of peace. On the other hand, during this period, Sweden invested heavily in military as well as civil defense. The doctrine of total defense included mandatory conscription for every male citizen, a large domestic weapons industry and weapons export to all the world, and one of the highest rates of bomb shelters per capita in the world. This that has been termed the deep militarization of the society is here symbolized by one example of the cottage cannons, which is anti-aircraft guns disguised as holiday cottage that still lingers in the landscape in Sweden. And we found the case of the Cold War, which became pastness not very long ago, interesting from a heritage perspective, because it concerns a heritization in the making. Although we understand that all heritizations are ongoing recreations and reenactments, the Cold War as heritage was, until quite recently, more or less devoid of ascriptions of meaning. And descriptions are currently being constructed. That was our idea. So, due to this emptiness or incomplete closure, we found the Cold War heritization an interesting case. And in the project, we used ethnographic methods. We visited military museums and other Cold War heritage sites, made observations, interviewed visitors and organizers, politicians, planners, etc. We have also analyzed web pages and feeds at Facebook. And we have made many observations. And one of many, many observations that I will dwell on here was that that Cold War heritization often comprises playful elements. And as an example, at Arsenalen, that's the museum you see in the middle of the page, and that's the Swedish Tank Museum that is part of the state-funded military museum network. Visitor was not only given the possibility to look at tanks in the exhibition, but was also given the opportunity to play a computer game called World of Tanks. And I will show you a little clip from the inauguration of this computer game section from 2016. And it's a film produced by Wargame, the Belarusian company that produces this computer game. And hopefully there will be sound as well. There's completely nothing now. No.
Love history. It's part of our DNA. We work with loads of tank museums throughout the world. Now, this particular museum, the Swedish Tank Museum, was critical in helping us get these Swedish tanks into the game. So once you've played them, the next logical step is to come here and experience the real thing.
Hello and welcome to the Swedish Tank Museum, and I'm on a very special tank that you're going to see in the game soon enough. This will be driving around later today, but before that, we're here to open the wargaming.net zone inside the museum.
What we want up here is to achieve three things. Firstly, there's the history. Up here, you can watch and enjoy the historical documentaries about the real tanks. Secondly, there's the experience, and what better place to put this than in the real environment. So in a museum where you can see what the real tanks look like and get up close and personal to them. And thirdly, of course, there's the gameplay and the fun aspect of it. So you can take these tanks, put them into the virtual world.
Okay, that's enough. Yeah, you get it. And we dwelled quite a lot on the social, cultural, and political consequences of this kind of playful enactments of historical violence and the mixture of fiction and reality in the museum context. And I will soon finish. To me, representing a heritage perspective, it has been interesting and developing and a bit challenging to cooperate with scholars from other academic disciplines. And looking back, I would say that this project was fairly successful. And as you can see, we have been quite diligent and already reported the results in many ways. And partly this is due to Corona that made us minimize fieldwork the 2 last years of the project and concentrate on writing. And I must confess that we were quite content that we had been able to capture this heritage in the making. However, soon after the project ended, as we all know, the geopolitical context in Europe changed with Russia's invasion in Ukraine. And with this, the old Swedish song of peace seems to have been recomposed. Instead of, as has been Swedish traditional attitude, advocating international negotiations and peaceful mediations, Sweden sent weapons directly to the Ukrainian army. To the left, you see a tweet where the Defense of Ukraine thanks Sweden's people and the Swedish king for the anti-tank grenade launcher Carl Gustaf. And Carl Gustaf is actually the same name, is the name for the grenade as well as the Swedish king. And without any debate, the Swedish government decided to apply for NATO membership, ending Sweden's 200 years history of non-alliance. And to us, it has been interesting to see that the political arguments for joining NATO are full of references to the Cold War. But even more interestingly, the new situation has affected how the museum interpret the period of the Cold War. Among other things, for example, Arsenalen, the Swedish Tank Museum, shut down the computer section that you just saw the inauguration of. Due to the current situation in the world, we have chosen to close the game corner, World of Tanks, for the time being. In other words, the Cold War heritagizations are being reinterpreted now in the light of a new geopolitical situation. The contemporary is actually affecting the past. So given this line of development, we are now applying for new funds to continue our investigation and explore what happened when historic experiences of geopolitical threats that are framed as heritage becomes reframed in the new framework of a new present-day geopolitical situation. Thank you.
Thank you also very much, Matthias, for this presentation of heritage in the making and for our interpretation of heritage according to geopolitical circumstances. Very, very great example of this. So we're now moving on to our third speaker, Professor Juliette Dimas. I should just say that on the internet, on the web page, it's the correct program. It's just the printed program that has been left a bit behind. So I just have to change the presentations. Yes, I will.
So we just heard something about how the contemporary situation affects the past. I'm going to talk how the past affects the future, or can affect the future. So what we do today with the past will have strong impact on the future. And I want to address the question of historical narrative of pluralism through cultural heritage. Cultural heritage has an important role to play in teaching pluralism. However, I don't think that this is what it does currently. What cultural heritage does for most of the time, site after site, palace after palace, museum after museum, is teaching nationalism. Exceptions are rare. We had a case yesterday, a very interesting case presented by our colleague from Tübingen, but it is still an exception, unfortunately. There are reasons for that, and the first reason is history itself. The birth of museums, as well as cultural heritage, as a concept, are both extremely directly connected with the rise of nationalism. They have been privileged tools to spread nationalism in plural. As a consequence, when you visit another country and enter a museum or an institution displaying cultural heritage of any sort, what you experience is both pluralism and nationalism. So the experimentation of pluralism is distorted by the demonstration of nationalism. Not the same that the one you can experience in your home country, maybe, another one, but another example of nationalism. And in that way, nationalism is not destroyed or questioned, not even a bit scratched by such experience, but instead, somehow, it ended up being promulgated. If such experience demonstrates something, it is a collision between diverse expressions of nationalism. So visiting Europe is like visiting a collage of nationalist expressions rather than interconnected histories. That's what should be changed, because European history is full of cultural pluralism, not as distinctive countries, but within and across each country. As a matter of fact, some histories, some cultural heritage, I forgot to change it. Sorry, that's not very important. So some cultural heritage cannot fit within national boundaries, or should not fit within national boundaries, should I say. I will rely on the example of the Ottoman cultural heritages. I will start with this image. It is not mine. It's not even my choice. It is a proposition from PowerPoint itself. When I type the title of the slide, this is the image that was suggests to me. Thank you, Big Brother. I decide to keep it because it is exposing the issue I intend to discuss. This screen is both accurate and extremely wrong. As a matter of fact, it symbolizes what Ottoman cultural heritage should not be reduced for. It should not be apprehended within nationalistic and really not within religious frame. Because Ottoman cultural heritage is not just about Muslim heritage, but also Christian and Jewish. And in fact, if I had the time for that, I would protest harshly against an essentialist way to consider Muslim heritage. But I don't have the time, so I won't talk about it. But I want to. So, Ottoman cultural heritage cannot be resumed within any nationalist boundaries by essence. Because the Ottoman society, from which Ottoman cultural heritage come from, was ethnically, religiously, administratively, judicially plural. Why was the Ottoman society plural? Not because of humanist ideas, not because of Islam, but because it was an empire. More precisely, an old empire, which I distinguish with the British or French, let's say the colonialist empire style. Indeed, all empires all have in common to rely on pluralism as one of its strongest components, by definition. Without pluralism, there is no empire. Roman Empire, Spanish Empire, Austro-Hungarian Empire, they were all plural societies. The degree or diversity of pluralism might differ from one case to another. And such pluralism are never administrative with egalitarianism, though they are not very good example of pluralism, but still, socio-cultural pluralism has existed. The problem is how to emphasize historical pluralism through cultural heritage. The first task would be to talk about it. But to do so, you need to recognize its existence without considering it as a threat to national identity. That means to make peace with the past. Obviously, one of the difficulties relies on political uses of cultural heritage as memorial tools. And we have a lot of examples in Turkey, for example, but I could give a lot of examples in Europe of political use of history. But politics is politics, and politicians are politicians. Twisting history is what they do. This is problematic, but it is less problematic that when we, as teachers, as historians, art historians, curators, when we do the same, when we take part of this distorting process. The Ottoman case helps us to realize one of the difficulties that we are confronted with, and it is naming plurality. We inherited a series of names to qualify cultural heritage, and most of them are ethnic nationalist-based labels. In most countries, if you search for Ottoman cultural heritage, you won't find any, because you have to check for Turk or Turkish level items. Therefore, you can also experience the contrary, like this helmet in the middle of the screen. It has been displayed during an exhibition at the Alcazar Library in Marseille to illustrate the Ottoman arts craft. The problem is, according to its notice, this item was not Ottoman. It was belonging to the Akoyunlus, a Turkish dynasty in rivalry with the Ottoman. So Turkish is like, you know, it's a Turk dynasty, it's the same. It's not the same. Second problem, the choice of this item in peculiar. What does it say about the Ottomans? That it was a military power, or that it has been a military power during its first phase of expansion. Is it wrong? No. But should the Ottomans be reduced to this solo idea? Is it not another way to evoke the fear of the Turks, cherished by a part of Orientalism, and that we still hear in some parties, political parties? Why not choose either, for example, a miniature from Levny that you can see on the right, or an illuminated page of a manuscript on the left? Would it not send another image to the public, for example? So back to the labeling issue. Let me show you some of the scale of the problem through a very small selection of examples. And I will start with St. Sophie that you can see in Istanbul, here, but in Istanbul there. As you are remembering, probably it was recently restored as a mosque after almost a century of existence as a museum. Before that, it has been a mosque for almost 5 centuries. And before that, a church for almost 1,000 years. The political debates around its status has made us forget how complex this monument is. If I wanted to be provocative, and I do want to be provocative, I would say that the monument is neither a church or a mosque, but a combination of both. Its history has made it evolve toward a combined product, bearing characteristics of both. So when you define it as a church, you do injure part of its past and part of its architectural featurings. When you define it as a mosque, you do the same. You injure the other parts of its story. So should we call it, I don't know, a mosque church? A churrosque? What term do we have to define accurately such combinatory buildings? Calling it a museum may have been a solution, but it's not a good one. I have my concern about the type of museum that it was before its reconversion. Now I want to talk about another example, the Ottoman complex at Aleppo and Damascus in Syria. You have one example on the left, up. This is the Murad Pasha's Curious in Damas. This kind of example dates back from the 16th century. They were built under high-ranking state individuals, even the sultans himself, like Suleiman. They were achieved under the supervision of the Ottoman imperial architect, Mimar Sinan. Their plans and several architectural components show characteristic Ottoman style. However, more detailed research demonstrates that they have been built with local architects' involvement. And several under-evaluated details show local signs of architectural influence. So should we label them Ottoman arts? Or, I don't know, Syrian, or what? And on what ground? What determined the administration of such labels? The identity of its patrons, the identity of the artisans, their current location? Label attribution seems to be extremely randomly chosen. They have no rational, no scientific basis. Why? Because art history, as well as museology, as scientific fields, have emerged under nationalist conceptions. So you have Islamic arts, Turkish arts, Armenian arts, Arabic arts, and so on. But what you don't have is Ottoman arts. It doesn't exist. However, when you want to say Turkish art, what does it mean? Can you scientifically define, for example, an Ottoman mosque from Mimar Sinan as Turkish when it was commissioned by an Ottoman with possibly no Turkish ethnic origins at all, and built under the supervision of an architect who was not Turkish either? How to qualify a palace realized by an Ottoman Armenian architect, expressing all Ottoman dominant tastes, which at that time was European taste, for an Ottoman sultan? Turkish, Armenian, European? How to qualify an Orthodox church like the St. Stephen Church that you can see on the right in Istanbul? It was built during the Ottoman time on Ottoman land on a request by Albanian community, Millet, with the authorization of the Sultan by an Ottoman Armenian architect named Hovsep Aznavour. Where lies the logic of all of this label attribution? Do arts have ethnical or national identity? Should we define arts through ethnic or national identities? Defining cultural heritage with tools created during a time of nationalist conception of identities is extremely problematic because it forbade us to grasp its plural identities. And more profoundly, it forces us to reduce it to an identity tool. So I will come to my conclusion. And I will emphasize the need to create new labels, new tags to talk about cultural heritage. We need to be able to talk and define pluralism of cultural heritage outside of nationalist labels. Finally, we also need to change our narrative customs to integrate cultural, ethnic, religious plurality of the past within the way we talk about cultural heritage. It is not just about tag, but also about where to put the light on. Just as we can choose to stop reducing the Ottomans to armed Turks, we can also choose to talk about the various origins of the artisans who contributed to build the Selimiye Mosque at Edirne, for example, or to consider Ottoman arts as a synthesis of multi-layered influences from East and West, but also North and South, just like the Romans used to do, instead of judging it in terms of copy or reproduction, as if the Ottomans were incapable of art production. The Ottoman example forces us to reconsider the role of the Ottoman within European heritage. But more importantly, it forces us to realize how inaccurate our vocabulary is whenever we want to express pluralism, not mentioning specific forms of pluralism. This is, to my point of view, one of the biggest issues that Europe needs to solve. We need to show that pluralism is not something new, that Europe is not a collage of national states and homogeneous histories displayed side by side, but rather that Europe relies on interconnected histories beside world wars, beside when we fight against each other. Instead of being afraid of it, we should rather embrace our interconnected histories as a sign of enrichment. Thank you for your attention.
Well, thank you very much, Juliette, for this very rich presentation, which touched on a lot of issues, political issues as well, very sensitive issues also. Well, actually, on my behalf, it was a surprise. I mean, as a Byzantinist, to see that your mention of and reference to the history of Saint Sophia. We'll come back to this, of course, with questions, but for the moment, we'll just proceed to our next speaker. And so I'm calling to the floor Professor Matthias Hans of the University of Salzburg. And now from art history, we're moving on to linguistics and languages, because Matthias is a professor of Romance languages.
Σας ευχαριστώ για την πρόσκληση σας. Χαίρομαι που βρίσκομαι εδώ. Να ήθελα να δώσω μια διάλεξη. Αυτό είναι γενικό ως γλωσσολόγος. That I should. And now my modern Greek knowledge abandons me. I think it's polite just to start in Greek. I only learned ancient Greek, but these days have been a perfect occasion for learning more both Katharevousa and some Dimotiki now. Katharevousa is easier if you have done ancient Greek before. So I'm going to talk, thank you for your friendly introduction, Theodora, on a very special kind of cultural heritage. So I've called my talk The Linguistic and Cultural Heritage of Italian. The starting point, of course, is Italian, but in a way this is, of course, kind of European cultural heritage, which is expressed in the lexica of different languages within Europe and in the world's languages, because of course Italian culture, starting from the Middle Ages and especially the Renaissance up to today, has contributed essentially in the vocabulary of a great many languages of the world, as we think of art and architecture, but also the ongoing influence of Italian in gastronomy, enology, and so on. So I'm going to present a research project and an international research network which combines some of the things that I think we can also make use of within the CIVIS network. So I'll just briefly give some technical introduction, but very briefly and not too technical, to the notion of borrowing and loan words. We can define that as the result of the imitation of a foreign linguistic pattern, just as happens with other cultural manifestations, foreign linguistic pattern by a speech community. I refer to various definitions that are extant in the field, and that can mean rather diverse elements, as we look at the case of Italian, like ciao, which has become pervasive in many of the world's languages. So it's just a simple monomorphemic unit, we would call that as linguists. So it's just a single word. And also some multi or polymorphemic units like dolce vita, we know all that, the dolce far niente, which also conveys certain stereotypes associated with Italian lifestyle. And it can also be grammatical elements like suffix like issimo, which in some languages, like in French, you can find at least in the in some jargon, some registers of publicity, for example, of advertisement, affairissimo. In German, it is used a lot also, and in some other languages. But you also have cases that are maybe more complicated, like English manage. Few people would associate that with an Italianism, whereas the meaning of this English word manage, which has become pervasive in the lexicon of many languages, manage, management, we all know that in the universities, but it derives from a semantic change, and it comes from Italian maneggiare, which has existed from the Middle Ages, from the 14th century, but this special sense was coined in the 16th century, and it comes from the terminology of training horses, and it means to govern a horse, so it's a kind of governing, and this special sense was transferred to English manage, so manage is actually an indirect Italianism. Or we have this famous German pseudo-Italianism. It doesn't exist in Italian at all, like picobello, or the famous saying of Galileo, e pur si muove, which has also in some languages been translated word by word in Sie bewegt sich doch in German. And this is the kind of things, of elements we document, and we've been doing that for many years. The project started, initiated by Harro Stammajon, a German Romance linguist, around 2000, and I was involved as a doctoral student, and we published a dictionary, but then soon we realized that a traditional paper dictionary is not the thing to do. So in 2008 we published that dictionary, and then we started transforming it into a database at once, which became the DFID, Dizionario di Italianismi in Francese, Inglese, Tedesco. And here you see some of the documentation. I think we can, it gives you an idea how we describe and make analyzable lexical elements in the form of a lexicographical database, providing the year of attestation, lots of information, and we are now transforming that. We've been doing that since 2014 in a larger project group into a whole platform for studying Italian loanwords, which we have called Osservatorio degli Italianismi nel Mondo. So it's a kind of an observatory on Italian loanwords in the world's languages. And, well, here you see the current website. The main objectives of this project are bringing together researchers and collections of data on Italianisms, on Italian loanwords in as many languages as possible. The project is headed by Luca Seriani from Rome, La Sapienza, and myself in Salzburg. And we work with a lot of colleagues around Europe and also some beyond Europe. We want to document and compare the impact of Italian languages like, as I mentioned, French, English, German, but we have gone far beyond that now in the last couple of years. The aim is to reconstruct, and here we come back to cultural heritage, the lexical migration paths. We could call that really migration paths, and the diverse borrowing paths of those Italian words which have had very different histories. And of course, it's also a historical dictionary, so the most intricate part, the most complicated part of it is, of course, the philological, etymological reconstruction of how one sense in Italian from a certain period has been transferred to a certain language and how that relates. Sometimes we have multiple borrowings, sometimes you have intermediate, you have French acting as an intermediate language for Renaissance terms that then migrate to English or to German and so on. And the case of Greek is very interesting because you have had, of course, a long-standing contact in the Mediterranean, the Venetian presence, and there's a colleague, Domenica Miniti-Gonias, who has studied that and with a very fine research, and we have integrated that work group now into the project. So we ultimately aim to make this data accessible and also analyzable. It's a database which is more refined than most online dictionaries we have so far, which makes the making of it so complicated because you can do very fine-grained research. You have the typology of the borrowings, you can have the reconstruction of the borrowing path and so on. And so we not only look at the major contact languages of Italian, which are of course the neighboring languages, but also loanwords in more remote languages. For example, we have a work group that has started working on Mandarin Chinese. We have the various languages of the Balkans, Arabic, and so on. And the whole thing is an already existing online database with two search engines. One is lexicographical, so you can search for the words. It is not complete yet, but you can already go there and look at it. And the older database on English, French, and German is complete, and so you can do research on that, and it already works. And you also have a bibliographical database, so if you want any documentation, and you can search. Of course, you can imagine it was one of the most difficult things was defining all the criteria, the categories, and then get the people who are savvy with the IT implementation of it to make a good database where you can choose a criterion like the language, the contact language, the subject of the research, and then you get the whole bibliography in order to do further research. The dictionary itself, as of now, so you would have to look at the second figure, contains about 12,600 loan words based on a little less than 6,000, 5,600, maybe now it's about 6,000 etymata, so the words of the Italian words of origin, because of course it's not all different words. Pizza has been borrowed multiple times, so that of course in the end we will have a much larger number of loan words compared to the etymata, to the words of Italian origin. And we also were able to document quite a few terms which are not, as of now, part of Italian dictionaries. So we're also doing something to further the knowledge of Italian lexicography. Of course, we work together with experts in Italy. So what comes out is a very specialized lexicographical resource, but which also is aimed at a larger public, because you can have like a view for the layman if you're just interested in certain aspects, but we're still working on that. And if you're interested in more fine-grained analysis, you can choose to get more information on the site. There are multiple search options. I won't go into details, but what maybe in this context can be interesting is to see that this is a research project, an international research network, which has been expanding. And it turns out, well, we have Canada and North America in it now, and we have a small work group in China now, but that is not as active, whereas between Milan and now probably Rome, we will be able to involve more people to work on Mandarin Chinese, which of course has borrowed some of the artistic terminology from the Renaissance, architectural terminology, but also gastronomic terminology. So here you just see a little bit how it is organized. Here you can get a glimpse of how the bibliographical database is working. We're working also on giving at least some basic information in English, but it must be said that the meta language of the project is, of course, Italian. It is one of the 3 strategic projects of the Accademia della Crusca in Florence, which fosters and of course gives also funding to the project, because of course in this case the national narrative, and it's not easy to keep that out, because we conceive of the project as a European project. But for example, if you apply for European funding, it can be said, well, this is a bit a national view, because it's aimed at showing how important the Italian language is and how Italian culture spreads around the world. So we are sometimes we have find ways to stress the international and the European character of the project, because it's also, I mean, in a second step we can also look at what is going on, and French is another case in point, Spanish. They also have contributed towards Italian and other languages. So in the end, this is part of a larger research effort where you try to get a good analysis and documentation of the loan words in and the language contact, which is so permeating our European culture. There's a constant contact. And so I've designed a little program which is going to be much better now with a new platform, with the new database. But this gives you at least an idea. You can also visualize the areal, the spatial distribution of the loan words. So that also gives you an idea how of lexical diffusion, as we call it in linguistics, how the loan words spread. So there's a lot of work to do still. So we've been working on this for a long time, but we've just applied for a significant grant for funding from the Italian Research Agency, so we could further the digital platform and go on working on lots of different languages. Now we now have moved from French, Italian, Spanish to Spanish, Portuguese, Catalan, Polish, and Hungarian. So we had work groups in all those countries working on that, and usually there are major experts who have worked on that field, and then we got together and we did things like Civis on a smaller scale, and we have these, I have to organize these colloquia, these symposia, and mainly in Florence, but and we also had one 2 years ago here in this venue in Athens. We were invited by Domenica Miniti-Gonias for the Italo-Ellinica, which is a series of symposia, of conferences that look especially at the cultural and linguistic contact between Italian and Greek. And so Maltese is a very important, small but very important contact language full of Italian loanwords, full of Sicilian loanwords, Greek, Mandarin Chinese, as I mentioned. We have people have started to work on Russian, and there's been an earlier project on about 70, almost 80 languages, and there's a lot of data that has already been gathered. That project was directed by Luca Seriani, but then it was never published, but we now are able to somehow recycle the material that was gathered. So the thing can grow fast if we get the funding, and we need students. We need doctoral, of course we have involved so far doctoral students, graduate students, and in some cases sporadically undergraduate students. In some aspects sometimes we found some funding, so we could give them a scholarship and they would work on an aspect, or they would do a master's thesis on, for example, the terminology of art and the whole historical reconstruction. So one doctoral student of mine, now she's a doctoral student, she did fine research, and she could show that much of the specialized terminology of art history in Germany is much older than we thought, because there were treatises that had mentioned the Italian terms 100 years earlier. So we're trying to do in-depth analysis both of single varieties and getting then an overall picture. And now we come to the more practical aspects, and it's where Civis might come in. So we have these work groups, as I mentioned, in a bit all over Europe. And within Civis, we have this strong tie with La Sapienza, with Rome, with Athens. And now there's a small group forming in Stockholm. Michele Colombo is, I think, it's been there for 2 or 3 years, and he has supervised, I think it was a master's thesis, very interesting work on Italian loanwords in Swedish. So that is how it comes about. That is how the scope of the project furthers. And so far, I mentioned we got funding from different agencies, and sometimes very small funding, sometimes a bit more important funding. But what the current, as the current and future developments are concerned, Civis might come in. So the proceedings of this Italeo-Ellinica Symposium from 2019 are just about to be published in a couple of days. Yesterday I talked to the colleague, she came here, and she's of course glad that now within Civis there would be new possibilities for getting in touch, whereas before it is just the personal research cooperation. So we have envisaged a summer school involving people from Sapienza, who will be working on Argentinian Spanish actually, Athens and Stockholm and Salzburg, of course, where we also have the people working especially on the German variety, on Italian loanwords and German varieties. That would be, one could talk about that a lot, because in Germany, of course, you have Alto Adige, South Tyrol, where you have constant contact with Italian. You have the Austrian varieties that have had a very strong contact with the Italian-speaking world. You have Switzerland, you have the common German variety, which has other Italianisms, still more from cultural background. So what we are trying to do now is to involve more systematically graduate and undergraduate students. We want to introduce them and train them, and a summer school is the perfect context for that, and we have done that before in the research method, the data collection, and the use of the database. And we have quite a few challenges ahead. This is how the database looks from the inside. This is not what you get when you go on the website. This is what the experts do when they have to insert the data. But I think, well, I think as we already have this network going on, it would be a fine thing to get involved more of the Civis universities within this network. Thank you for your attention. And I forgot to say, this was not very visual. I would have had a photo of a pizza and all these typical things, and you will be, that is, we are implementing that. Of course, it's going to be for the non-professional users, also trying to make this interesting, so making the cultural heritage expressed in the language also visible, because there are many things. You could talk about food, you could talk about architecture and art, and so the database will be linked to an image database. Sorry. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matthias, for this very ambitious project that you presented to us, and we wish all good success with coordinating all these teams over the world. And of course, in languages and literatures, we're not so lucky with presentations of art historians, but nobody would expect that, so I think we're fine on this. Thank you again. And now we are moving on to our last presentation. Give me a moment. I think after the γιατί αυτό το μικραίνει. I think I will need a bit of help with this one because it expands to the whole screen. It covers the whole screen when I open it. Γιατί είναι PPSD, είναι άλλο. Θέλω το PowerPoint. Αυτό δεν είναι PowerPoint. Είναι αυτό το εδώ πέρα το ανοίγεις και μπαίνει έτσι και δεν μπορώ να ανοίξω το... Well, in the meantime, I'll just present our last speaker. We'll close with a speaker from the University of Athens. Great, thank you. Associate Professor Vasiliki Chrysanthopoulos, who is a folklorist and social anthropologist. So we're having yet another view. And you can see the title on the screen, on University Heritages. We're coming back to this, as with our first speaker, the Folklore Museum and Archives of the University of Athens.
So we don't need to change anything. No. Okay, thank you. Hello from me too, and thank you very much for being present, and also thank you for the honor of having me in this panel. Okay, I'll be telling you the story of folklore as a discipline through the lens of the Folklore Museum and Archives of the University of Athens. And in this way, I'll also be talking about the heritage of our university in the sense of the involvement and all the work of academics, teachers, students, because this is a living archive and very dynamic. And how it ties with the vision of Civis. Now, the Folklore Museum and Archives, FMA, I may be calling it, of the Faculty of Philology, as a microcosm, represents the developments of Greek society and culture over the past 60 years and beyond, reaching the beginning of the 20th century. As a repository of ethnographic information and oral literature, as well as ethnographic objects. I'm saying 60 years ago and beyond because it started, as you're going to see, in the mid-1960s, early 70s officially, but the work it contains refers to testimonies and memories and information that goes back to the beginning of the 20th century. Also, developments in the theory and methodology of folklore, folkloristics, laographia is the word we use in Greek, since its inception as an academic discipline, and current challenges in Greek and European societies as they are met by folklore as part of the humanities and the social sciences at the University of Athens. Heritage, I like this definition, is the way in which a group creates gradually and slowly a collective identity by narrating stories about itself. The FMA represent the heritage of the National and Kapodistrian University of Athens in the following ways. They represent the teaching and research methods of generations of folklorist academics, documented by their publications and other teaching materials. They hold the projects of generations of students who collected, organized, commented on, and deposited valuable bodies of ethnographic and folklore material from various parts of Greece, Cyprus, and the Greek diaspora. They preserve and safeguard these materials in their ethnographic and museum collections. I'm using they because it is Folklore Museum and Archives, but it is one institution, okay. They make these materials available to researchers and to the wider public through a policy of openness and civic engagement as an institution practicing academic and public folklore. The FMA offer an insight into the development of folklore, logografia, as a discipline in Greece and at the University of Athens. Nikolaos Politis, you're going to see him later, a professor of Greek mythology and archaeology at the University of Athens, established folklore in Greece, named it logografia, gave it its theoretical and methodological orientation, and created its academic infrastructure. The Folklore Archive, currently known as the Hellenic Folklore Research Center of the Academy of Athens, the Hellenic Folklore Society, and its scholarly journal, Logografia. The discipline of logografia studies all aspects of everyday life, social organization, oral literature, material culture, beliefs, and rituals of the Greek people. At its inception, it endeavored to research and study the cultural continuity of Hellenism with its ancient Greek and Byzantine past. Since the post-1950s, it has been studying various aspects of contemporary Greek culture in terms of their transformations in the context of modernity, globalization, and digitization. Epistemologically, it employs research methods pertaining to the humanities and the social sciences. You can see here Nikolaos Politis, founder of Folklore in Greece. He 1852-1921. He taught Greek mythology and archaeology at the University of Athens, including folklore in his courses. Here you can see glass plates used by Nikolaos Politis in his lessons on mythology, containing material on ritual in different cultures. A folklore library with a folklore collection started to be organized in 1965 and was formally established in 1972 by the late Professor Georgios Spiridakis. The students were trained to collect primary folklore material, mainly from their communities of origin in Greece and in Cyprus, on the basis of a questionnaire. This material was later deposited in the folklore collection, which also included microfilms, recordings of folk songs and music, legal documents such as dowry certificates, wills, bills of sale, loan, etc., and photographs. The collection also contained objects donated by students, which often complemented their manuscripts. The folklore collection has been digitized and is partly available through the University of Athens digital repository Pergamos. You see here a digitized manuscript in Pergamos. Quite a lot of our material can be accessed in this way, and also a digitized object here, an oil lamp. And here you can see a manuscript open, 2 pages, in which material and intangible aspects of culture appear intertwined. This is from Panagiotta Vlachou's grandmother, shown here sitting at the loom and spinning wood, with specimens of her work while the procedure is described by the author. This is what we call tachyrographa, the manuscripts, the ethnographic manuscripts, and the early ones have got all these objects inside. And here you can see part of the collection of ethnographic manuscripts displayed side by side with the ethnographic objects at the Folklore Museum and Archives. In 2017, the Folklore Museum and Archives were officially instituted, concluding an initiative which started in 2009 by now Emeritus Professor Minas Alexiadis and his folklorist colleagues. Thus, the folklore collection was dissociated from the folklore library with which it had coexisted for 43 years, and the FMA acquired their first director, that is myself, in 2018. I'm no longer the director, we rotate. The current director, Marianthi Kaplanoglu, is sitting over there. Yes, we have a continuity. They are on the 7th floor, the archives of the School of Philosophy in the University campus of Zographou, Athens, still with limited resources in terms of funding and personnel. They continue to function as a repository of ethnographic material and as a living laboratory for undergraduate and postgraduate students of folklore who continue to enrich the archives with primary material and the donation of objects of cultural significance. Now, the new manuscripts of the FMA respond to current social and academic needs and challenges. How? Students' current ethnographic projects reflect new trends in conducting field work. Ethnographic information is not fragmentary, but contextualized. Informants, collocutors are represented as agents, and there is an emphasis on life narratives and narratives of personal, professional, traumatic, etc. experience. Also, students' interpretations and reflective comments and ethnographic observations are included in their projects submitted to the archives. That was not so at the beginning. I mean, they did the collection of the material by using questionnaires. Specialized archives have been created, such as the Archive of Life Narratives of Migrants, Refugees, and Diaspora Greeks, and the Archive of Autobiographies of folk poets, singers, musicians, and other artists. And there will be more specialized archives. Now, our current projects with an emphasis on migration, refugees, and diasporas. In February 2019, we celebrated Mother Tongue Day by organizing an event entitled We Remember Our Mother Tongue by Exchanging Proverbs. Refugee adolescents living in the Hospitality Center for Unaccompanied Children of the Greek Red Cross exhibited their alphabets and talked to us about their proverbs while interacting with students and staff in the archives. This successful intercultural event, initiated by postgraduate student Spiridoula Tsoukala, led to a collaborative project involving the Greek Red Cross, the FMA, and the Laboratory of Qualitative Research in Psychology and Psychological Health of the University of Athens. Staff and students of folklore and psychology collaborated in this project, which led to the production of 2 postgraduate theses and to a valuable intercultural experience cultivating mutual acquaintance and empathy among adolescent refugees, students, and teachers. Here you can see the students, adolescent refugees in the Hospitality Center preparing language material to exhibit and present at the archives to celebrate the Mother Tongue Day. The FMA are contributing to the 100th anniversary of the relocation in Greece of Greek refugees from Asia Minor. We will be exhibiting ethnographic documents such as testimonies and refugees' diaries and objects belonging to those refugees or to their descendants. These items will be part of an exhibition open to the public and organized in the School of Philosophy during the autumn of 2022. The following slide shows the first page from a diary written by the grandfather of an undergraduate, great-grandfather of an undergraduate student. You'll see it. This man is as a 9-year-old boy, lost his entire family in the massacre that took place in his native town of Ortaköy, Bithynia, Turkey, in 1920. But he himself was saved and managed to come to Greece. His autobiographical account, in which he recounts his traumatic experiences, is entitled Is This a Life Worth Living? In a ζωή αυτή. His granddaughter, my student, great-granddaughter, my student, has been interviewing her grandmother, who is the daughter of the author of the diary, and his other descendants. She is discovering a lot about her own family heritage, about the transmission of traumatic heritage, which we are discussing in class, and more generally about the research methods employed in folklore and oral history. Here you see the first page of this diary. Είναι ζωή αυτή, title. Is This Life Worth Living? And this was, of course, discovered because of our classes, and the student decided to become seriously occupied with it. I mean, this is a living archive. The FMA practice academic and public folklore. Academics and students increasingly use collaborative ethnographic methodologies in their projects in the ethno-anthropological disciplines, while social practices involving openness and civic engagement are encouraged, such as the following. An online international conference on ethnographic archives and intangible cultural heritage is being organized by the FMA at the beginning of next year. It aims at initiating exchanges among academics, researchers, and lay students of public and private ethnographic archives who will attempt to analyze intangible cultural heritage as a concept and as an issue critically, and as an issue of state and international cultural policy. We are also in the process of creating a new interdepartmental postgraduate program on folklore and cultural management to provide our students and other practitioners in the area of culture with the theoretical knowledge and practical skills required to respond successfully to current challenges in a business-linked environment. Our view of folklore as a discipline inextricably bound to society and its current needs has inspired us to participate in civis. We three folklorists of our faculty, we are here, all three of us, Marianthi, Georgios Koutras, and myself, we participate in a course entitled Going Public, Social Sciences and Humanities in the 21st Century in Europe, along with colleagues from the Universities of Bucharest, Tübingen, and Stockholm. In this interdisciplinary collaboration, we are contributing our expertise in the fields of oral literature, urban folklore, and migration and diaspora. Through this project, our contribution to university heritage is no longer linked only to the University of Athens. It is linked to the Alliance of European Universities represented by civis, thus serving the vision of an open, democratic, equitable, and critically aware European society and civic identity. The following slides are from the kickoff meeting of our course on the 5th of May, 2022, because this is going on now. So I'll simply just show them to you. Now, that was the kickoff meeting. Explore the potentials and challenges of going public in several connected disciplines, anthropology, ethnography, literary studies, and folklore studies in response to the social, political, and ecological issues facing societies and collectives in the diversified Europe of the 21st century. Here you see what our areas are, which we cover. Okay, sorry. Finishing. These are the four universities participating with teachers and staff. What we mean with going public, okay, this is just, it's all available anyway. And here some selected references. And I would like to thank you very much for your patience.
Thank you very much, Vasiliki, for presenting us with Another aspect of heritage, bringing into discussion the personal aspect and how it affects us also in terms of refugees and the refugee crisis that we have been living through over the past few years. Well, this was our last speaker. Thank you very much to all our speakers for these very rich presentations and very diverse ones, which I'm sure will lead to a lively discussion. And just to recapitulate a bit, I mean, we've seen how heritage affects our lives, how heritage is affected by international politics, how we interpret it on a national level, on a personal level, oral and written languages add history, how we interpret our past, and what is the future of reinterpreting our past and our heritages according to circumstances as they arise. So all sorts of problems that hide behind this heritage in contemporary Europe title. And we will just welcome questions now to our speakers, and please, the floor is for the audience. Thank you. Yes, please. Ioana Fruntelată from Romania. Perhaps you would like to state your name when asking a question.
Present myself. I'm Ioana Fruntelată from the University of Bucharest, a member of Hub 2 Council, and my background is philology and ethnology. I just want to thank you very much for organizing these sessions, or all 3 sessions. I think we're completing very well each other, and somehow this one on heritage offered, I think, some solutions to our issue, how to involve actively our university activities in changing our European society for the better. Because this heritage, as our colleagues demonstrated, is lived heritage at first within our universities. So we can act as somehow heritage bearers and preserve the heritage in our universities, which can be heritage spaces. Our colleagues who collaborate or who are involved in critical museum studies, I think showed us a good model of transforming universities into living heritage communities, if I may say so. Professor, sorry, I put down some notes here. I'm going to just to look a little bit. Professor Frihammer, I have a question on your presentation, which was really interesting. We talked the other day about commodification. Yes. Is this heritageization of military heritage, is this really heritageization, or is it commodification? It was just curiosity. It was very interesting, your concept of heritage in the making and the demonstration that we actually transform the past by thinking about it in the present. And also this point that our colleague Professor González Garcia made, that we have to look at the other end, that we have to make the heritage accessible and visible. It was also pointed yesterday by our colleague Professor De Castro from the Museum of Stuttgart. We have to look at the other end, to look at the beneficiaries, and for heritage it's very important this participation, involvement with participation of communities, and how can we I think this is lived heritage, actually intangible cultural heritage, which is interconnected with material and tangible heritage, should be lived, should be alive in order to go on, in order to be preserved. And I think in this respect, our colleague from Stuttgart just showed us a model of living heritage with passion. If we have some such academics who are involved in studying languages and opening this history of fascinating history of a language to the public, I think we as academics can be a model of heritage bearers. Thank you very much, Vasiliki, for presenting this project, in which also we, the colleagues of the University of Bucharest, are involved, and I hope that we can develop our collaboration and maybe attract some more colleagues into this work, which is complex, of preserving our heritage, and especially intangible heritage. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Ioana.
Yeah. Okay, I got a question, and when it comes to heritage, I, as an academic, are quite agnostic. I don't think heritage is good or bad. I don't think we have to preserve heritage. Heritage is ways of using the past for purposes today, and some of very often it's commodification of the past. That's a kind of heritization, I would say. And I don't think there's a need to preserve heritage, because there's only one thing that's always present, that's change. When you try to preserve, when you try to conserve, that's when you use power in some ways. And for me, I think heritage is a good object of study to get to know the contemporary more than the past. For me, as an ethnologist, with my perspective, is that an answer? Hmm.
Any other reply from the panelists? Yes.
Yes. Well, you have made quite a broad approach and reflection on this. I myself made an effort in order to embrace the material aspects of heritage, whereas other colleagues here have demonstrated how intangible heritage can be also understood and presented widely to an audience not formed just by our students, but also by whole communities. In this sense, I would like also to, let's say, to redirect this question to also to Matthias and especially to Juliette as well, and how to first to Matthias. I mean the first Matthias, not this second one. How to gender, or better to put it better in words, how to degender a military museum where just male visitors were queuing for this game thing that was obviously the main attraction of the museum, and also to Juliette, because I'm trying to put forward some controversy. Well, you have presented several cases of Ottoman heritage, but set up in current Turkey. Most of the examples, except for the one for the helmet that you have shown. How to deal with heritage that is located in current Europe, in our territories? How not to avoid the military aspects of that, and is it anachronistic, emphasizing the importance of miniatures instead of pointing our view on the tradition that the Ottoman culture has been shown as and understood as a menace to Europe. I mean, I was trying just to connect your both papers, which I found interesting, with yours, which is with your question, which is somehow difficult, not to say impossible.
Well, I don't know if I can answer the straight question how to what would you demasculine the military museum. I would rather say that that's a kind of heritage that I think it's not good. It's underpinning patriarchy structures. It's underpinning the masculine protection position, putting the feminine position as being the one who being protected. So our aim wasn't really to give a. We were looking at this. We were asking questions to the museums, but we didn't come with any answers. I think maybe we want to make it possible to reflect on the some negative sides of heritage, actually.
You ask a very, very good question, in fact. How to change, how to talk differently. And the example of the Ottoman is just an example, and I think we should do it for a lot of histories. But it's a good example because it's something we have trouble with, because we are talking about, it's not the church, but we are talking about the church, and it's not necessarily the part of history we want to share, which is a problem, I think. And obviously the biggest problem is that what you said, we talk all the time about wars, about the conflicts, and about politics. And it's just like we can't go out of that. But that's what we are doing. That's not what the cultural heritage is talking about, not necessarily. I mean, if we think it that way, how much cultural heritage is actually showing military confrontation? Not that much. You might have some castles, but it's not the must. It's not what you have everywhere in the countries. So I think if we actually look at what we have, we already have a lot of things to talk about differently, and we are doing it. I mean, we are choosing to show this and use I don't know, whatever items, and to say this is an example of this war or whatever. That item doesn't say that, or is not necessarily saying that. We are doing it. And so we are constantly repeating an history of confrontation and a history of war. And the problem is, I made this kind of, I try to do this with my students, for example, when I explain them the Ottoman history. If you tell the history through war, so through dates, you will have wars and wars and wars. But if you teach them something else, war is not, how many years are we talking about in terms, it's 7th century of history, and how many years of wars? Not that much. I mean, and still it was an empire founded with war and confrontation and so on. So that's because we are so much fascinated with war and with big victories or big losses or whatever, and big men. And so we go back to another. So when we talk about war, you talk about men. And so you talk about man personality and so on. So you also is part of a teaching history where woman is not part of history, which is also very wrong. And then you have people who come to say, students say, but look at history. It's always about men. So, you know, men and war and men and politics and so on. No, you can teach something else. And cultural history, that's what I want to say. Cultural heritage, it's not teaching history. When you teach history, you have students who has to come to your courses, of course, because I have to get a note. but you are teaching, so you have a position or something like that, and it's already like, you know, and they are going to listen, or you are already political or something like that. You make some statements. But somehow cultural heritage is perceived, wrongly I think, but it's perceived like not a statement. It's like it's not supposed to be political. It's extremely political. That's my point. But it's not the way it's perceived by the public. I mean, myself, when I go to visit something, I don't know the history of the place, I don't have the way to judge whether it's nationalist or not, and whether the history that is told there is good or not. I'm just reading what is written, and so I'm just learning through that. So you don't have the same filters that you can have toward an historian or toward a politician, and it's not the same filters, of course, but you don't have this. So it's extremely important to be aware of what we are doing with it, because we are basically teaching everybody something, and if we are not aware of what we are teaching and the consequence of it, then we keep doing the same things again and again and again. And it will end up with war and more and more wars. Because we are teaching wars. I mean, that's what we are teaching. And then, oh, why do we have wars? We are teaching wars. So that's, let's change that. That's it.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for these replies. Well, I should just say that in the Balkans there's a lived Ottoman heritage, so to say, so there's a lot of discussion on this. Other questions from the audience? Yes, please, could you state your name? Yes, thank you.
So my name is Delia Popescu. I am from University of Bucharest. I am a member of Open Lab at the University of Bucharest, and at the same time I'm representing the university in the Hub One Council. And I am a chemist. So I want to congratulate you all for your wonderful job and the projects, but at the same time I want to raise an issue. Maybe we should try to have a deeper, a transversal approach of the cultural heritage and try to involve the scientists a little bit more in your work, because I think that it's not, I really like the fact that you're bringing to our eyes the cultural heritage sites. But it will be, from my point of view as a chemist, I think an interesting approach if we will talk about the materials used to erect this, all the artifacts and all the buildings. And I've been a little bit visiting the Athens, and I was impressed with everything what I've seen. And at the same time, there is a great need of preserving and conserving this heritage. And you do need chemistry, and you do need physics. And I think that we should try to connect a little bit better and try to work together for our own benefits, of course. So this was the issue that I wanted to raise. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for this point. Yes, you're very right. Especially, well, I mean, for us, also having a small museum and archive, we can see the importance of these things that you've been mentioning in terms of preserving, but also in terms of scholarly collaboration too. For example, lots of our manuscripts, our ethnographic manuscripts, have got information of on folk medicine, for example. They even have specimens of various plants that students have collected. And certainly the intangible aspect of them should be better explored and used. Yes, thank you very much.
Okay. Good morning. My name is George Kouzas, and I am assistant professor of urban folklore at the University of Athens. First of all, I am very happy that I raised my real hand after 2 years of pandemic, and not my digital hand like in Zoom or in WebEx. And second, I'm also very happy that we are here face to face or mask to mask. I don't know. I have 2 questions. The first question is for Vasiliki. I want to ask you about this very interesting term, public folklore. And can you give us some more details? How is connected with the ethnographic materials, the ethnographic manuscripts of our archives? How we can use the manuscript, or, all the information for the public folklore in a few words. And the second question is for Juliette. I liked very much your research, and I absolutely agree for all that you said, and I like very much that you focused on material culture and the social life of things, and the social biography of things. And I want to ask you if from your research you have found also fragments or continuities from the oral past, the orality, or the traditions of the Ottoman Empire. That means that if you have mentioned or you have focused on, I don't know, in your research, on myths, on folk tales or fairy tales that from the Ottoman empires that are alive today. Okay, thank you very much.
Yes, thank you for the question. I did not want to read all that stuff, but I think that I gave an example by showing you this and telling you about the case of, for example, this diary, which is an ethnographic, a piece of ethnographic information, which will belong to the Folklore Museum and Archives, and how this has linked the student behind. Yes.
Robert Barron, you know,
yes, yes.
Common friend.
Sure.
For like a job.
Well, yes, yes.
That's the question, not
Yeah, right. I mentioned that too. You know, public folklore has got to do with the engagement of the community, first of all, which is what we do already in the Folklore Museum and Archives, and the fact that we brought in, for example, the adolescent refugees to talk to us about their languages and their alphabets, and so we involved the academic community and the wider community. That this is part of public folklore. Also, for example, our efforts now to establish, and it's going to happen, a new postgraduate course which is on folklore and cultural management is exactly in this, responding to this idea and this need, the fact that our students are already receiving and will receive more education, knowledge, and skills, so that later, also by doing such a degree, they will be able to find employment in different, for example, municipalities in Greece or other areas where there is need for people who have a good capital of knowledge, but also practical knowledge, which they can acquire and they will be acquiring in the context of the Folklore Museum and Archives, because it's got all the material and will give them the opportunity to practice these skills. So it's practical and theoretical too.
You ask a very good and tricky question somehow. So the immaterial heritage somehow, that was the question. Well, I'm gonna say it. I slightly put it on the side because I'm already working on something that doesn't have a name, and working adding the immaterial heritage, which is also something a struggling notion, concepts. It was too much uncertain things, but so working on materiality is easier somehow. However, even if you don't want to talk about that, it comes back to you. You can't escape that. So we do. I mean, I'm working with colleagues, so I'm not the only one in that. We do address the question of immateriality, but through a different perspective. First, we have all the question of intellectual heritage through the manuscripts. You know, the manuscript, and it's the same with the monument, with the building. Somehow, the question we are trying to resolve is the adequation or the dynamism between the materiality of an heritage, whether it's a manuscript of a building, and what the immaterial part of it. So for a manuscript, it's very easy to understand. You have the manuscript itself, and you have the ID, which is written in the manuscript. But it's also exactly the same with buildings, at least some buildings. For example, the saint place, the sacred place. So you have a lot of, in all of those places, even if they have been abandoned, you had some practice. It's not just a place you go to worship. The worshipping part of the is important. It's something, and the building is somehow here just to give a place for whatever is supposed to happen there. So what is supposed to happen there is something immaterial, and that's what stays. And it's very interesting. The Ottoman case for that is very interesting because it forces us to consider the material as something less important than the immaterial part. For example, normally you say that the church or whatever, I'm using the church as an example. I don't have a problem with church. It's just that, you know, you say the church in itself is very important. Notre Dame de Paris is important. We had all the question about should we restore it differently or and so on and so on. Like it has to say the same because, you know, the materiality of it is express something, and it's somehow more important than what goes within the place. For the Ottoman case, it's somehow the contrary. What is important is what is immaterial within it, within the place, the shrine itself, what happened there. And the rest, it can change. So they have no problem destroying completely a building and restoring it completely on a new way. Because what is important is not the building, it's not the architecture. The architecture should somehow follow the modern taste or what is considered as good taste at that time. Why? Not because I don't have a concept of heritage or because I don't care about the building, but because what is important is not the building. What is important is what goes there, what is there, the spirits over there, or whatever. And so it's, you see how you have conflicting apprehension of what should be preserved or transmitted. So yeah, I guess that's going to be my answer.
Well, thank you very much. Is there a desperately urgent question for a couple of minutes? If not,
not desperate, but just very quickly. I just wanted to, because I've been thinking very much of what you've told us, Juliette. I'm sure that you probably know this good article by Andreas Wimmer and Glickschiller on methodological nationalism. It's very good because, I mean, you know, even our concepts are connected with nationalism. The way we have been brought up, the way we have been educated everywhere. Okay, so this is important to bear in mind now. As regards Ottoman heritage, this is, again, how can we view it? We can try. I mean, it's a matter of maturity of society and of the, but it is definitely connected with political, geopolitical, etc. Sort of conditions in the world. Heritage itself, as a concept, we know, is a modernist term. I mean, it's something we use to analyze what's going on now, the way we look at the present. So we cannot dissociate it from, I mean, analytically we can. We can talk about contested heritage, contested Ottoman heritage, for example, in Greece or in other parts of the world. I see now that there are interesting studies coming out in the US on Ottoman Greeks. Very interesting and with a broader perspective, not nationalistic. It takes time, but it goes hand in hand with political and historical sort of developments, whether we want it or not. We can be very, and we should be very careful, of course, but it's there.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the problem. It's hard, so we have to start at some point. And yes, obviously, I mean, we can say it again and again and again. Past is all about present. But what I wanted to say that it's also about the future. So if you want a different future, if you want to change the way our patterns, we have to deal today what we are doing with the past. It's all connected. So yes, it's difficult. And yes, obviously, we are going to end up or again with, we are not going to kill nationalism right away. But if we don't start at some point, if we don't try to do it place by place, side by side, and I don't know, one course after another, then we are doing, at least we are doing something. I mean, that's, maybe we won't win. Maybe it's a war we can't win. Maybe we shouldn't win that war. I don't know. I think we should win that war, but maybe we will never win it. I don't know. But at least we should try, because what we know is what happened with nationalism. And basically, it's war. I mean, there is no other option. At one point, that's what happens. So if we want to try to do something else, and Europe is about trying to do something else, that the construction of Europe is built on that, then we have to do it differently. And that's what I want to say. Let's start, at least there we can do something. We know we can do something, and we know there will be some results. It's very hard, that's the difficult part. You can't evaluate it, this impact. I mean, as far as I know, and there is research about it, the impact on long term of cultural heritage and what it does to people is extremely hard to evaluate it. But we know there is an impact. There is several impacts. So let's try that, because there we can do something. We can change politics. We can change the question of a lot of things about, I don't know, power relations, struggles about gas or whatever. We can change that. But at least we can change the way we are addressing the past. Not for today, because today is too late. We can change it for tomorrow, for our children and our grandchildren, and hopefully they will live in a better place than we are right now.
Every day counts.
Yes, exactly. Every day, every step counts.
And on this optimistic note, I will close the session. Thank you very much to all our speakers and to the audience for this great discussion. And I should also thank the speakers for one more thing, that They actually connected the heritage question with our students, presenting all of the courses and the CIVIS and what CIVIS is about, and also for the concern of finding jobs for our students, which is nothing. It's nice that it came up that as well. And I think it's a nice introduction also to the museum network, which is going to be discussed this afternoon. And it's open. It's a closed session, but it's open to the Hub Council members. Thank you very much again for your attention and participation. Thank you very much.
Stockholm. Okay, so in that case, have I got, can I,
You can have my
Bucharest?